as Martha said, I was just asked to give this talk yesterday because Anushka was feeling ill. And so I just want to send my good wishes, all her good wishes to Anushka, that she feel better soon. So the Buddha said, I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. And in the practice, he points out to these three roots of suffering that we all have, greed, hatred, and delusion. And all our afflictive mental states arise from those three qualities. From greed, that includes all the hatred and all the minor irritations we have. Did I say hatred? Okay, I think I said the wrong word. So greed includes all the desires we have, obviously, and hatred, all the huge variety of ill will that we have in the world, and delusion is kind of our obliviousness to what's really happening at any given moment, which anybody who's looked at their own minds has found a lot of that, right? And so, these deeply influence us in everything we do, how we respond to each other, how we react in the world. But the one thing is that within each one of these forces is the seed for transforming into wisdom. It's like the desire that we have, that the greed we have, is that same force that says, God, I want to be free of this suffering. So within each one, there's that seed, the thing that pushes away everything. I hate that. I don't want that. That's irritating. That's the same seed that allows us to see how to train the mind in being wholesome. And within delusion is the quality of, you walk in, nothing matters, everything, step on the puddle, you don't even notice your feet are wet. And, that leads to, has the seed for equanimity, for a very sweet state that it notices the puddle, but doesn't get upset about it if we made a mistake. So in each one of those roots is also the healing of that root. And today I'll focus on the root of hatred and the transformation of hatred into wisdom. So I'll start with, a metaphor that many of you have heard, I know, but it's so makes a point that I really like to use it. In Buddhist psychology, we often call these three personality types, greed, hatred, and delusion, as the desire type, the aversion type, and the delusion type. And it just means that in our personalities, those forces are a little bit more prominent. And the metaphor we use is, imagine that we're going to a party of, some wealthy people, and the desire type walks in, and there's this awesome view. I mean, really beautiful, beautiful view, and they're just like, wow, this is amazing. But within moments, the mind says, I want that. And, I want to buy a house just like this where I can have that kind of view. And maybe I should change my job and get a better job and make more money. And that view is no longer appreciated or seen, right? The aversion type walks in, and they see the stain in the corner on the carpet. They look over at the food trays, and God, it's just full of junk food, and the music is just, how could they pick that kind of music? And don't get me started on the guests, And the delusion type walks in, kind of oblivious to everything, and including the fact that there was a huge sign at the door that said, "Please take off your shoes," and everybody else took off their shoes, and they're all in their stockings feet, and they just walked right in with their shoes. So these are like these stereotypes of these personality types. It's way oversimplified, but we all have all of them in some way or the other. Just sometimes some personalities predominate one over the other. So, these roots are referred to as the torments of the mind. And they're ready to torment us incredibly quickly. And I'll give you an example. Early in my practice, my husband and I had been discussing, we went to Dharma talk and we're discussing the topic of letting go of attachments. And we've been kind of discussing different aspects of letting go of attachments over a couple of days. And I woke up the next morning and I was in a really good mood, and I was really looking forward to my fresh cup of coffee, and I had it in my hand, and I was just about to take a sip when my husband just grabs it out of my hand. And like that, I went from a great mood to really pissed off. and, and it's like all three defilements showed up, you're right? I wanted that coffee desperately. I was really angry, and I was really completely delusional and not seeing the huge grin on his face, right? He didn't mean it, he was just teasing, but that was his way of continuing the conversation about clinging. The first step for really creating this transformation is recognizing aversion, hatred, ill will, all those different forms when it shows up. And it's amazing how often we don't see it. I mean, if we're really angry, we kind of know it. But it can take so many forms, like just resistance. Just a simple resistance. Walking into somewhere we don't want to be, resistance. We're not happy, right? We can have very strong emotions, like getting pissed off over the coffee, or, something's just not warm enough. The coffee just isn't warm enough. We have all these little things that aversion shows up. And those of you who just sat for the last 35 minutes probably had a little bit of aversion show up at some point, where, maybe the breath wasn't quite to our liking. And instead of just noticing, oh, that's a rough breath, we're like, okay, let me make it better. Let me fix it. There's something to fix. So these habits of mine of resisting what's unpleasant are very, very strong in us. And half of our lives, I don't know if it's half, but a really large amount of our life includes unpleasant experience, right? How much of the time do you go outside and the weather is perfect? You're dressed just right. There's no chill. It's just the right temperature. You get more of that in California, but but still, it's like, I should put something warmer on. Just these little let me turn on the air conditioner. How many of us just turn on the air conditioner for the minor unpleasantness sometimes, or turn on the heat when it's just minorly unpleasant. We're so in the habit of trying to always find the most comfortable, excuse me. Getting trapped here. So if we look at our life, one of the things that I learned on retreat, in retreat, when we go on insight retreats, we usually have like a work meditation. And, my first several retreats, my work meditation was chopping vegetables, which was I really enjoyed that. But the next retreat was cleaning toilets. And what a bummer, just wasn't happy about it. But it was one of the most wonderful practices because, you're committed to being mindful, to doing the job mindfully. And it's very, very different if we clean a toilet resentfully, we clean it like, okay, let me do it and try to get it over with as quickly as possible. Or you clean it mindfully and to the point where, wow, this is really fun. I'm enjoying cleaning the toilet. I didn't think that was possible. And it completely changed my relationship to the things we do at work. It's not that there wasn't sometimes an unpleasant smell, or it was awkward, or there was something I didn't like about it, but there was a way that we can show up for that doesn't darken our hearts, that doesn't contract us. We can be doing the same activity and do it happily or do it miserably. So ill will can be described as an unfriendly or hostile disposition. It can be towards anything at all. We often think of it as towards people, hatred towards people. But sometimes we hate ideas, right? There's lots of ideas these days we hear on the news that hatred can arise. We hate emotions that we don't like. We hate physical sensations we don't like. And we can hate objects. An example, this is like decades ago. Someone gave me this, a potter gave me a head, and it was like kind of ugly and devilish looking, but it was kind of interesting, and so, I put it on the mantle, and another friend came over and picked it up and go, ugh, and they dropped it and broke it. They were so repelled by it, they had so much aversion that they dropped it. But we respond to objects that way too. It's we can, hate anything, right? Another way that, the aversive mind tends to focus on what we don't like, right? On what we don't like, what we disapprove of. But also, it tends to give that too much meaning. So we can notice the stain on the carpet, but we make it really important. We can notice the junk food. I mean, no matter how quantumous we are, we still notice the junk food. But we don't have to contract our hearts around it. And one way of an example that for me is very poignant of how we do that, when we're teenagers, and you get a little pimple on the face, just this one little pimple, and you look in the mirror, but what you actually see is 95% pimple, right? And I know that from experience. And so we overemphasize the what's wrong with things, the unpleasant. For some of us, aversion arises most easily with physical pain. But I've seen minor discomforts be just as irritating as pushing against them. An itch, have you, I hope you've all had the privilege of experiencing a really strong itch and living through it. But also living through it mindfully, with like, oh, that's unbearable. Well, let's see if it is unbearable, and really not scratching it, just hanging with it and watching that strong, strong sensation that feels unbearable move through us. And that's really the heart of the practice. You can do all of the practice of working with hatred in that way that we can do with an itch. And so we can't do with an itch, we're going to have a really hard time doing it with anything else, anything really big. So can we do it with an itch before we try to do it with maybe some political figure we have less than friendly feelings towards? Um, um, The other thing about anger is, and maybe some of you have experienced this, is that anger can sometimes be a motivator. And it brings up a lot of energy, right? And so sometimes people get, not only anger, but aversion, the whole, when I say anger, I mean the whole realm of kind of hostile energy that we might have. And it can motivate us to do things. But it's not a healthy source of energy. And it actually ends up exhausting us. It's hard on our bodies. And it's also not a sustainable energy. But we might be in the habit of using that to get our energy, using stress to get our energy. It's a little bit like, when I was in school, I'd wait till the last minute to study, because I'd be so stressed. All the hormones were going through my body. I had lots of energy to study. Not the healthiest energy to study, but that's what I got used to. But we can get even better energy, much better energy from inspiration, from enthusiasm, inspiration, really wonderful feelings. But so there is another source for that strength in us besides that. I mean, anger makes us feel strong when we feel weak, which can be really helpful when you're, fighting the tiger, right? You want that extra physical strength. But when we're just living a life, living in a city like this, living, with family and friends and work, and we don't need that level of anger to get our energy. So the way we practice with this in meditation is when those feelings arise, any feelings of aversion, of irritation, there's usually a story. There's something that irritated us. There's something that we're angry about. And we turn our attention away from the story, not rejecting it, pushing it away, but just shifting the attention to how we feel in the body. That's also happening in the moment. What's happening in the moment? What is it like to be angry? At this moment, it's not always the same. At this moment, it's not an intellectual thing. Okay, I know what happens when you get angry, but it's in this moment, what does it feel like in my gut? What does it feel like in my body? Some people, their hands just tighten. They grasp their knees. Some people, their bellies get really tight. Some people, a lot of things get tight. So what is the experience like in our bodies? What's the experience of sadness in our bodies? What's the experience of any strong emotions we have in our bodies? So the story, we don't need to feed that story. We feed the body that's being present with what's happening. The stories are a fuel to the unwholesome emotion. Joseph Goldstein said, aversion is transformed by interest. You can't push away what's happening and take an interest in it at the same time. Right? So another example, many years ago, a friend was supposed to pick me up from work, and they forgot about me. And I'm standing out there, it's getting to be dusk, and they're not showing up. And of course, it was the days before cell phones, and, so I couldn't text them or reach them. and I was really angry. I got really, really angry. And, and after my anger subsided a bit, then I started, thinking about, okay, arranging to get a ride home, and I found a place to make a phone call, and I took care of it. And by the time I got home, I was pretty mellow. I forgot all about it. I started, putzing around the house, doing stuff. But when my husband got home much later, I told him what happened. And I got just as angry as when it had happened. Just retelling the story. And, and then really consider how often we retell stories about our childhood or regrets or things that just happened. How often do we do that in our minds? Retell the stories. So when we see that we're telling ourselves a story that's triggering these unwholesome feelings, it's just a habitual story. This is just as real. This is just as authentic. The story is not any more real than what's happening in our bodies right now. So the instructions are simple. Drop the story, go to the body. Even though I know I mentioned the three personality types, humans tend to have a negativity bias. Where we have the tendency to notice what's wrong with things. And it's what helps us survive. If we're out for a walk, and to see a beautiful sunset, and we're really enjoying it, and there's a tiger, we want to focus on the tiger, not on the sunset, right? That's dangerous. So we tend to have that little bit of a negativity bias, but it often kind of bleeds into the rest of our lives, where we keep noticing. We meditate, and we might focus on what's wrong with our meditation, what's wrong with us, instead of how am I right this moment, what's happening right now, But how the kind of attention we give this negative experiences we have is what transforms the practice. So we can give very kind attention. I like the term affectionate curiosity. So when anger rises, it's not pretty, right? It's not pretty to see anger, to see hatred in ourselves. But what happens when we give it affectionate curiosity? This is what anger is like. It hurts. It hurts. And this is actually a tool for developing wisdom. And the ability to see what's wrong can also be used. It's an important aspect of the mind that sees what's wrong. It sees the tiger, it sees the sunset, it sees the difference. It's not oblivious. So in Pali we call wisdom panya. It refers to the deep understanding of reality, a very deep understanding of reality. That's not an intellectual understanding, but it's an understanding, an insight that comes from practicing deeply. And it's an understanding that frees our hearts, that actually allows us to be really at peace with our lives and be at peace with the world. One aspect of wisdom is the ability to see in any situation what decisions we make that are going to be helpful and move us towards happiness, and what decisions we make that are not helpful and move us towards further suffering. It seems intellectual, it seems pretty obvious, right? But it's amazing how often we make the choice of moving towards more suffering. The habits of mind that makes continuous suffering, that feed our suffering. like doom scrolling, right? It's not a habit that makes us happy. And yet a lot of us are stuck on those little devices, supporting and strengthening our ability to suffer, ability to be unhappy. So aversion tends to divide things. What I want, what I don't want, what I like, what I don't like, them and us. When we give too much attention to what's wrong than to other aspects of them, it's a very, that dividing of things creates more tightness and contraction in our hearts. But the same ability to see the differences between things can also mature into what we call discerning wisdom. So instead of saying, that's what I like, that's what I don't like, that's what I want, that's what I don't want, we change the quality of that to, oh, this is helpful, and this is unhelpful. And that's huge. That little bit of difference is huge. It's a heart that's at peace, It's like, yeah, we're in a difficult situation, challenging situation. How can I help? What can I do to help right now? And, we're in a, and we drop what's unhelpful. We may not like the pain in our back. I don't know. They say 1 out of 4 people have chronic pain in any given moment. So I know that some of you have experienced some pain this last sitting. But we can see that when we pay attention, we can see that our resistance to it or aversion to it, the bad mood, it doesn't help at all. So the pain can be there, and we can give it kind attention. And it actually improves the sensations of pain. They found that when the mind is at peace, the sensations of pain are decreased. And a different aspect of aversion, again, this is a personal story in my very early days of practice. And I was at a board meeting, and board meetings, well, I won't say anything. I won't go there. It wasn't my favorite thing to do. But I always was really good at noticing what was wrong with the plan. People bring up plans. I'd always notice all the faults in it, And I wasn't shy about expressing my opinion. But it seemed to me that my role often was to burst someone's bubble. People would come up with these enthusiastic ideas, great ideas that were really full of holes, right? And of course, I would give those holes, and didn't make me very likable, and I felt resentful about it, contracted, righteous, and I rarely left those meetings feeling good. But as I got to become more familiar with the inner workings of my mind, I began to see that, it's really good to be able to see the holes in things. It's really able to see what's wrong with things. I mean, it may not be a tiger, but that's going to fail if we do it that way, right? But I didn't have to do that with a contracted heart. I could do that with a lot of kindness and equanimity. And with time, I learned to express myself. It was useful, but it also made collaboration fun. Which I'd never gone to a meeting or been involved in something like that. That was actually fun, And I love collaborating with others now. It's really great, different ideas, pushing back and forth. No, not that way, this way, but done with a really friendly, open heart. In insight practice, we call that tool that we use to noticing what's helpful and not helpful investigation. And, we often talk about investigation in insight practice, investigating the moment, investigating the breath. And for instance, the really obvious practical thing is, it shows the difference between when the muscles are relaxed and when they're tense, right? It's the investigation of the moment that lets us see. I remember when I first started meditating, first time I realized I'd been sitting for like 15 minutes with my shoulders like this. Maybe some of you had that insight, right? The insight into how we hold our bodies. Sometimes the tension in the face, the frowning and all these habits, and so we slowly use that tool of investigation. Oh, what's really happening here? Oh, that's not helpful. I can drop that. Oh, that's helpful. I can do more of that. In particular, how many of you have gone distracted, right? In meditation, right? And so sometimes, I've gotten really lost, and then I kind of see what I'm getting lost in. It's like a fantasy I'm really enjoying. I go, I want to keep going. So I caught it, but I keep going, right? I'm so seduced by it, And, and the investigation says, well, here I'm meditating. What am I doing? Let's go back to meditation. You can fantasize anytime. And it's like, oh, okay. That attachment. But that's the practice. It's like that's what we address. The root of all our suffering is that clinging. I just got to keep going in that fantasy, just got to do it, That's what we're addressing in practice. And that flexibility of dropping the story and going back and doing it in a kind manner. It's like not putting down on ourselves that we just got distracted. That we just spent the last 20 minutes of the meditation, planning a vacation. And so we're back home. Great, wonderful, kind attention. That's what clinging does. It's we see how our minds work. And it's really easy to investigate the quality of our minds at any given moment. Are we having a kind attitude or an attitude of ill will? For a really long time, longer than I want to say, every time I came back to my breath when I was distracted, I would feel like I had just failed. And so my attitude was like, I blew it. Back to the breath. I blew it. And it never occurred to me that journey between waking up and getting back to my breath was really essential. It was reinforcing something really unwholesome in me. And I started taking that journey, waking up. Oh, great, I'm awake. And I'd come back to the breath with just a lot of kindness and in a warm field. Of course, that's what the mind does. That's why I practice, because the mind wants to, play or delve in the mud, the mud of the things we don't like, or whatever things, take us away. So there are two aspects, two ways that we primarily develop wisdom. Sometimes we call them two wings. One of them is the idea of letting go when something unwholesome is happening, and the other is the idea of cultivating whatever's wholesome. And just by meditating daily, the practice, we learn to develop some calm and some tranquility. And calm and tranquility allows us to see, we have so much more room to see when aversion and when these, any of the defilements show up, any of these torments of mind show up. And so we're able to see them, and it takes the nourishment out of them. In a moment of calm, any moments of calm and peacefulness are moments where we're not feeding those roots, where those roots start, shrinking. And the other side is the side of letting go. And the standard metaphor is, if you're holding on to a hot coal, you're just going to drop it because you recognize it, right? You don't have to think about, maybe I should drop the hot coal. What do you think? Is that wise or not? We're just going to drop it. And the same thing in our minds. What happens often, we just don't recognize that we're holding on. We don't recognize how tight we're holding on. And so we can lean in the direction of letting go. But we can't force ourselves to be calm. And we can't force ourselves to let go. We can, maybe with a muscle we can go, okay, I can drop it. But maybe you've had this experience in meditation where, the teacher says, let go, and nothing happens. We're just still all tied up in knots, And I remember, early in practice, one of my sittings, I just had an argument with a friend, right before coming to a group like this, it was just like, I was like really agitated, and I spent the first part of the sit, I'm just thinking about all the justifications and all the things I should have said and that I can still say, and then the teacher's doing a guided meditation. And they're going, relax the body, relax the mind, and it's like, how do you relax? I can't let go. How do you relax when you can't let go? How do you let go when you can't let go? And I practice with this, many, many times. But as I continued to practice with it, I saw that I could incline my mind towards letting go. It wasn't going to let go instantly, but I could incline in that direction. And what it meant was that when I had a choice of spending the next 5 minutes rehearsing my arguments, I could choose not to do that, right? And still there'd be this tightness in my heart, but I'm just inclining the mind. And I saw that part of the nature of the mind is that a lot of the work of the mind happens underneath. And the experience, for instance, if you've seen, maybe you've had the experience of having to get up really early in the morning, and much earlier than usual, and setting an alarm clock, and then waking up right before the alarm clock. It's happened to me many times. I stopped setting alarm clocks, and the subconscious is doing the work. The subconscious. So when we incline the mind, we can begin to trust that that's enough sometimes. That's what we can do right now. That's what's happening right now. And, we can't, as I said, we can't force ourselves to let go. We can do some things, but, the metaphor, flower blooms in its own time. You can't pull the petals open. But they'll open if we nourish them. If we water it, we nourish it. And we nourish it with our intentions. We nourish our hearts with our intentions. My intention is to let go of suffering. My intention is to let go of the anger of the story. So I can see it clearly. So I can respond with an open heart, with an easeful heart. And so wisdom arises naturally when we pay attention. Everything there is to know that's important in our lives is right here. It's right in these bodies and these minds and these hearts. And by paying really close attention and developing our attention, we can release, these roots, these things, and allow them in their own time to free themselves. As we settle the minds in meditation, we start seeing things much more clearly instead of being filtered by our preconceptions, by our ideas, by our judgments. We start really seeing the process of how our minds and bodies work. But what's really the deeper aspects of this practice is that as mindfulness becomes more penetrating, as we train the mind and where we're really able to see the nature of reality, we can see intimately how experience comes and goes. We all know that everything in life is impermanent, right? We've known that for a long time. Nothing lasts, right? But this is an experiential level we can get to where it's like deep in our bones when you really see that nothing lasts. There's nothing you can hold on to, right? And in the intellectual area, we still try to hold on to everything, right? We're going to keep that relationship. We're going to keep that, keep the fridge full all the time, whatever it is that we grab onto. And it becomes clear that no experience we ever have is going to give us lasting happiness. It's going to give us any kind of sense of lasting satisfaction. So our experiences in our life, no matter how wonderful the trip is, no matter how wonderful the relationship is, no matter how wonderful the vista is, it's never going to last, give us lasting happiness. So to look for happiness in the conditions that change all the time, that won't fulfill us, to keep looking there is the recipe for suffering, for continued suffering. And, and then we can still see or might see our limitations or imperfections, but we don't have to believe that they define who we are. They're just part of the changing landscape of our lives. And we can begin to know a happiness that doesn't insist on things being just right, that doesn't insist that things be the way we want them. And that's the fruits of this practice, the being really at home in this world, in our lives. And the last thing, this kind of wisdom comes from here, from within, from ourselves. Even though a teacher might say some wise words, the Dharma, the books, talks, everywhere we get, this tremendous amount of wisdom. But still, it all comes from here, from developing our own hearts and minds with the practice, from freeing the heart and mind. So thank you very much for listening.